Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we climb into an 1849 Oregon Trail wagon, while freezing rain needles the canvas above your face, and every breath feels borrowed from a cellar. You are tired, damp, and trying very hard to believe this box on wheels is a bedroom. A grey dusk settles over the prairie. The wagon smells of wet wood, old flour, leather, cold iron, and tired people, and yes, you probably won't survive this if your grand plan is just snuggle harder. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the rain begins its patient little drum roll, tell us where you're listening from, and what time it is where your own blanket is hopefully much warmer than this one. Now, dim the lights and step closer to the wagon, because the evening is already folding in. You stand beside a canvas cover that is no longer white. Not really. All day the road has splashed mud up the wheels, over the hubs, along the spokes, and onto the lower boards, until the wagon looks less like a proud vehicle of migration and more like a tired loaf dragged through gravy. The rain is not snow, which almost feels insulting. Snow, at least, has the decency to look pretty. This is freezing rain, sharp and sly, striking your hat brim, crusting along rope fibres, glazing the wagon tongue, and turning every exposed surface into something that wants you to slip. The wagon is not the Grand Conestoga of paintings and patriotic wall art. Those heavy freight wagons are too large for this journey. Your family's wagon is smaller, lighter, and more practical, often called a prairie schooner because the bared canvas top can look like a sail crossing a sea of grass. That is the mainstream historical fact tucked into your cold little evening. Many emigrants in 1849 travelled in compact farm wagons adapted for the trail, carrying supplies rather than offering much comfort to passengers. If you expected a cosy rolling cabin, history gently pats your hand and says, "No, dear, absolutely not." You reach up and touch the canvas. It feels stiff where the wet has chilled it, soft and sagging where water gathers in shallow pockets. The rain makes a delicate tapping sound over your head, almost soothing. If you ignore the fact that the shelter is trying to become a sponge, every drop has its own small voice. Tap, pat, tick. A slower plunk comes from the rear, where a sag has formed. Somewhere the rope tightens, complaining in a low creak. Somewhere else, a seam darkens and begins to bead. The wagon bed itself is narrow, about 4 feet wide and 10 feet long. That space must hold bedding, clothing, food sacks, tools, spare parts, cooking gear, and perhaps a chest with family papers. Maybe there is a treasured Bible, maybe a cracked blue plate somebody refuses to abandon because sentiment is stronger than common sense. You look at all of it and wonder where the human body is supposed to go. The answer is creatively. You climb in because there is nowhere better to be. The tailgate is slick beneath your hand. Your fingers find the grain of the wood, swollen from weather, and you pull yourself up carefully. Inside, the air changes. It is not warm, but it is enclosed. Damp blankets give off a woolly animal scent. Canvas has a sour, wet smell. A sack of flour carries a dusty sweetness. The floorboards are hard, uneven with the shapes of cargo beneath quilts and rolled bedding. A wooden chest presses against your hip. A tin cup shifts with a tiny clink. You hear someone outside mutter to an ox, not angrily, just with exhausted politeness, asking a 1,000-pound creature to keep cooperating with civilization beyond the canvas. The camp becomes a blur of lantern glow, hunched shoulders, dark animal backs, and smoke that cannot decide whether to rise or crawl sideways. A quirky little trail tidbit, some emigrants smeared wagon covers with mixtures that could include oil, paint, or other waterproofing treatments, and accounts sometimes mention homegrown fixes that were more hopeful than elegant. One person's sensible water repellent was another person's sticky, smelly disaster. Imagine bringing your best household logic to the wilderness and discovering that the clouds have no respect for your recipe. You ease yourself down on a folded quilt. It is chilly at first touch, then colder as your weight presses dampness upward. This is one of the quiet cruelties of freezing rain. It does not always soak you dramatically. It creeps. It finds sleeves, trouser knees, dress hems, and stocking cuffs. It turns leather stiff. It turns wool heavy. You're not lying in a puddle. That would almost be straightforward. Instead, you're lying in a suggestion of wetness, somehow more irritating. The canvas roof curves above you, close enough that you feel less like a person in a room and more like cargo that has developed opinions. When the wind presses against one side, the whole cover breathes inward. The ropes hum softly. The wooden boughs flex just a little. The wagon is a shelter. Yes, but a shelter with doubts. Historians still argue whether emigrants remembered these nights mostly as misery endured or as hardship later polished into family legend. Diaries can sound practical, even plain, because people on the trail often had no time to decorate suffering. They wrote of rain, mud, cold, sick cattle, bad roads, and then moved on to the next day. Yet memory is a curious blanket. Years later, the same wet night might become proof of courage, foolishness, or protection. For now, there is no stove. There's only the chill working through your clothes, the smell of wet canvas, and the careful arrangement of elbows and knees around objects too important to throw away. Your hands are rough from the day. When you rub them together, grit rasps against your skin. You tuck them under your arms, then change your mind because your sleeves are damp too. Outside, someone laughs once softly, in that thin way people laugh when complaining would take too much strength. A child coughs, a kettle lid rattles, a man calls for another rope to be checked, because if wind gets under the cover and lifts it wrong, the wagon can turn from bedroom to laundry line in one brisk lesson. You pull a blanket over your lap, it scratches your chin. A corner smells faintly of smoke. And for once that is comforting, because smoke means fire, and fire means supper. The freezing rain keeps falling, not violently, not dramatically, just steadily, as if patience is its main talent. Above you, the canvas darkens. Around you, the cargo presses in. Beneath you, the boards hold the day's cold. Beyond the thin wall of cloth, the camp becomes a night camp. One rope, one animal, one damp blanket at a time, while you sit inside the shelter and wait for the business of making camp in mud to finish around you. The camp does not appear all at once. It is built out of small, tired decisions, each one made with cold fingers and a little less patience than the one before. You remain near the wagon as the train slows, wheels sinking into the softened track with a sound like heavy bread being pressed into dough. The day has narrowed to mud, rain, breath, and the dull ache in your calves, ahead and behind. Other wagons settle into place, not in the neat circle so often painted later, but in whatever arrangement the ground allows. A full defensive circle takes time, space, and purpose. Tonight, the purpose is simpler. Stop moving before the road swallows everyone. Your boots slide when you step down. The mud is not dramatic at first. It is just clingy, brown, and personal. It takes an interest in your soles. It grips, releases with a wet smack, then grips again. You try to move with dignity, but the prairie does not care for dignity after freezing rain. You hold one side of the wagon and feel the cold wood under your palm. Rain ticks on your hat, gathers along the brim, and drips beside your ear in steady little taps. The oxen stand steaming in the dimness. Their hides are dark with rain, their ribs moving slowly, their patience almost holy. A mainstream historical fact settles into the scene. Here oxen were often preferred over horses by Oregon Trail emigrants because they were strong, steady, cheaper to maintain, and better able to live on rough grass. They were not fast. Of course, nothing about this journey is fast, except perhaps the speed with which your optimism can leave your body when your sock gets wet. You help unhitch them, or at least you stand close enough to be useful when someone needs a strap held, a pin passed, or a nervous animal soothed. The yoke is heavy and slick, wooden bows fit beneath the oxen's necks, and the smell that rises from them is warm, sour, grassy, and alive. You can smell wet hide, old sweat, trampled weeds, and manure loosening in the rain. It is not pleasant. Exactly. But it is honest. Every creature here is doing its part, and every creature smells like it. The men speak in low voices, not because they are always solemn frontier heroes. Please do not give them too much cinematic credit, but because everyone is tired and sound seems to carry strangely beneath a stormy sky. A command to one animal becomes a murmur across the camp. A child crying in one wagon feels close enough to touch. A cough from a neighbour makes you wonder who is ill, who is merely wet, and who has been pretending all day that a chill is nothing. You drag branches toward the lee side of the wagon, though most are damp and nearly useless. Someone has gathered buffalo chips earlier, dried dung used as fuel where timber is scarce, and yes, that is the quirky tidbit of the evening in treeless stretches of the plains. Travellers often burned dried animal dung because it was available, light enough to gather, and could make a workable fire. There is something humbling about crossing a continent and discovering that dinner may depend on yesterday's prairie leftovers. Civilization, it turns out, is very selective about what it judges. Tonight, even the buffalo chips are reluctant. The rain has touched them, and they smoke with a sulky persistence. A little flame catches, retreats, catches again. You crouch close, shielding it with your body, though your coat drips onto the very thing you are trying to save. Smoke slides along the ground and finds your eyes. Of course it does. Smoke has always been a brilliant detective of human discomfort. You blink, turn your head, and breathe through your mouth. Around you, camp takes shape in layers. Animals are led to feed if grazing is possible. A few are tied near wagons, heads low, ears flicking against rain. Harness is lifted away and hung where it might not freeze stiff overnight. Though might not is doing a heroic amount of work. Buckets are set out, axes are laid where they can be found. A coffee pot appears, blackened and dented, as necessary as prayer. Children are assigned tiny tasks. Carry this, hold that. Do not step there. Please do not poke the fire. Please stop asking whether we are in Oregon yet. You see one small child wrapped in a shawl so thoroughly that only the nose shows. Another is being scolded for trying to rescue a floating stick from a puddle, with the seriousness of a naval commander. The child may be cold, but the stick is apparently in crisis. You lift a sack inside the wagon to keep it away from damp. It is heavier than expected, flour, perhaps, or cornmeal. You feel the strain in your shoulders and the cold bite of wet cloth against your wrist. Every object has to be guarded from the weather. Food must stay dry. Powder, if carried, must stay dry. Bedding must somehow dry while rain falls on the thing meant to protect it. The wagon is not merely transportation, it is pantry, closet, nursery, tool shed, and now, reluctantly, bedroom. Historians still argue whether most overland companies were guided more by strict written rules or by flexible habits shaped day by day on the trail. Some groups drafted constitutions, elected captains, and set regulations for guarding, camping, and travel. Others operated through loose agreement, social pressure, and the practical wisdom of whoever had not made a terrible decision lately. Tonight, whatever the paper rules may say, mud is the captain. You look across the camp and see lanterns appearing one by one, blurred by rain on your lashes. Their light is amber, small and trembling. A woman bends over a kettle. A man checks a wheel. Someone spreads a ground cloth and immediately regrets believing in ground cloths. A dog shakes itself beside a wagon, spraying an innocent bystander with a fan of cold droplets. The bystander makes a sound that is almost language. The freezing rain adds a shining skin to everything. Wagon spokes gleam, ropes darken, hoofprints fill with cloudy water. Your own breath shows faintly, then disappears. The air smells of smoke, mud, wet animals, and the metallic chill that comes before a harder freeze. If the temperature falls further, all this mud may stiffen by morning, locking ruts into the earth like bad decisions preserved for educational purposes. You help pull a canvas flap tighter at the rear of the wagon. The rope is rough, soaked, and unpleasantly alive in your hands. It refuses to slide at first, then gives suddenly, making you stumble. Someone tells you to mind your footing, as if you had personally chosen to perform a mud ballet. You nod, because argument wastes warmth. At last, the oxen are settled, the fire is trying, the wagon is secured as well as it can be, and supper begins to seem possible rather than theoretical. The light has nearly gone. Beyond the small ring of camp, the prairie fades into one continuous grey shadow. You can no longer tell where the wet grass ends and the low sky begins. You climb back toward the wagon for a moment, not yet to sleep, only to fetch a cup, a shawl, a little courage. Inside, the cramped canvas shelter waits with all its damp smells and hard corners. Outside, the camp breathes, coughs, smokes, mutters, and sinks deeper into the mud. The night is not ready for rest yet. Before anyone can shiver properly under blankets, there are wet clothes to face, leather to rescue, bedding to judge with great disappointment, and 100 small choices between being cold now or colder later. You take inventory of your discomfort with the seriousness of a banker counting coins. One sleeve is wet at the cuff. One shoulder is damp where rain has slipped beneath your wrap. Your stockings are not soaked, which feels like a victory, until you realize they are merely cold enough to make your toes seem theoretical. Your boots are crusted with mud, and the leather has begun to stiffen as the air sharpens. Every little piece of clothing has become a question. Can it dry? Can it be slept in? Can it be removed without making everything worse? The answer, usually, is no, but in several different ways. You sit inside the wagon with your knees drawn up, trying not to knock over a tin plate or squash a sack that someone has warned you contains something important. The canvas roof sags slightly overhead, and the rain continues its patient ticking. You can hear people outside speaking in low voices, but their words blur through the cloth, softened by weather. Inside, the world is made of texture, scratchy wool, damp linen, cold leather, wooden boards that hold the chill like they are saving it for later. A mainstream historical fact presses itself gently into this miserable little wardrobe moment. Most emigrants on the Oregon Trail carried limited clothing, and laundering or drying garments properly was difficult during long stretches of bad weather. People did not have closets full of replacements waiting in the wagon. They had what they had. A second shirt might be wrapped in a trunk. Extra stockings might be guarded like treasure. A dry blanket could feel as valuable as a legal document, and honestly, more useful at bedtime. You peel off one glove, if you are lucky enough to have gloves, and flex your fingers. The skin feels tight and rough. Damp fabric has rubbed at your knuckles all day. You tug at your cuff and watch a bead of water roll down the weave. It vanishes into your sleeve. Delightful. Wonderful. A tiny river has decided your arm is the Columbia. Near the wagon opening, someone shakes out a coat, and droplets scatter onto the mud below. The coat hangs from a peg or wagon bow, not because it will truly dry, but because hope requires gestures. Wool is both friend and enemy. It can keep some warmth even when damp, which is one reason it has been loved by people in cold climates for centuries. But wet wool grows heavy, smells strongly of sheep, smoke, and human effort, and presses against the body with a clingy affection nobody asked for. You consider removing your outer layer if you take it off. The chill bites through your shirt if you leave it on. The dampness steals warmth slowly. This is the trail's idea of multiple choice. None of the answers are good, but some are less ridiculous. You settle for loosening what you can, wringing a hem quietly, and spreading one shawl near the least leaky patch of canvas. A quirky tidbit comes rustling out with the bedding. Some travellers used feather beds or feather ticks early in the journey, only to abandon or trade bulky comforts when the wagon grew too heavy or the road too punishing. A featherbed sounds luxurious until you remember that weight matters, space matters, and wet feathers are not exactly a cloud sent from heaven, more like a damp bird argument in mattress form. You touch the bedding. The outer quilt feels cool but not ruined. The blanket beneath is drier toward the centre, and you slide your hand into that hidden layer with a small private relief. Warmth has not vanished entirely. It is just hiding like a shy animal. You spread the top quilt carefully, keeping its drier side inward. Someone reminds you not to let bedding touch the wagon wall, because the canvas and boards may pass along moisture during the night. You nod as if you have not already learned that every object on this journey is trying to become damp by association. Outside, the fire snaps weakly. Smoke pushes through the opening, bringing the smell of half-burned fuel and wet ash. It clings to fabric. It enters the wagon and settles into everything, as if making sure future generations will know you tried to have supper. Smoke in your hair, smoke in the quilts, smoke in the seams of your clothes, by now. Your personal scent is less fresh pioneer and more laundry basket near a campfire during a weather emergency. Historians still debate whether emigrants were more troubled by dramatic crises or by daily discomforts that slowly wore down morale. The famous dangers are easy to remember: river crossings, disease, accidents, storms, broken wheels. But there is another kind of hardship, quieter and very persuasive. It is the damp sock, the cold sleeve, the blanket that never quite dries, the need to sleep with one hip against a crate because the crate contains food and the food must not be left outside. You lean back, just a little, and listen to the wagon creak as others shift nearby. Perhaps your mother or sister is sorting clothing by touch, choosing what must be worn again tomorrow and what might be tucked into a drier bundle. Perhaps a younger child is being stripped of muddy stockings while protesting in a whisper, the way children do when they are tired enough to cry but still offended by assistance. Perhaps your father is outside pretending not to be cold, because many men of the 19th century appear to believe that shivering becomes optional if one stands with enough purpose. A pair of boots sits near the opening. Mud cakes the soles, and the leather gives off a bitter tannic smell if they are too close to heat. They may crack if they are left wet. They may stiffen or rot if they are placed inside. They bring the entire trail with them. You understand, suddenly, that footwear is not an accessory. It is a survival arrangement with laces. You work a stocking loose from your foot. The motion is slow because the fabric clings. Your toes emerge pale, wrinkled, and offended. You rub them with both hands, coaxing life back into them. There is no privacy, not really, but everyone is too tired to care. Modesty bends under weather. You keep your body turned slightly away and pretend the wagon's cargo is a wall. The freezing rain thickens briefly, ticking harder against the cover. A little line of water begins crawling along one of the bows overhead. You watch it travel, pause, swell into a drop, then fall onto the edge of a folded blanket. You move the blanket at once. One tiny drip can become a cold constellation by morning. Someone hands you a dry cloth. Not perfectly dry, perhaps, but dry in the generous frontier sense, meaning less wet than you are. You wipe your ankles, you press the cloth between your toes. The relief is modest and almost ridiculous, yet it feels enormous. On the trail, comfort often arrives in crumbs, a dry strip of cloth, a place out of the wind, a cup held between both hands, a few minutes before someone asks you to help again. You fold the damp stocking and lay it where air might pass over it, although the air itself is cold and wet. So this is more a ritual than a plan. Still, rituals matter. They say you have not surrendered to the weather. You arrange the quilt. You tuck a coat near your side, but not against your skin. You keep the driest blanket for the hours after midnight, when the cold will settle lower and meaner. The wagon is becoming a crowded nest of compromises. Wet garments hang like tired flags. Bedding is shifted, turned, guarded. Leather is set aside. Wool steams faintly when brought near the fire, then cools again. Each choice is small, but the sum of them is sleep or no sleep. Warmth or no warmth. Sickness or another day of walking. And through it all, the supper smell grows stronger outside, thin but promising, calling you back into the smoke and freezing rain, because before you can crawl beneath your carefully defended blanket, hunger must be answered with whatever plain meal the trail is willing to allow tonight. The smell of supper reaches you before supper itself does, which is cruel but traditional. It slips under the canvas and into the wagon, thin at first, then fuller as the fire outside finally decides to behave like fire. Smoke comes with it, of course, because nothing on this trail arrives alone. The scent is a layered little promise: damp ashes, scorched metal, boiling grain, maybe bacon grease if fortune has not completely abandoned the camp, and the faint sweetness of coffee darkening in a battered pot. You ease toward the wagon opening, careful not to drag your newly defended blanket into the mud. Your body objects to every movement. Your knees have been folded too long. Your shoulders remember the yoke, the rope, the sacks, the cold. When you climb down, your boot finds a slick patch, slides half an inch, then catches. A tiny adventure. Very brave. Future generations will not carve it into marble, but your ankle appreciates the victory. Outside, the camp has shrunk into circles of dim firelight. Each wagon holds its own little weather-beaten world. Faces appear and vanish behind smoke. Shadows bend over kettles. Children hover too close, then get sent back, then hover again. Because hunger has a magnetic field. The rain is still falling, but more gently now, a fine icy drizzle that settles on hats, sleeves, eyelashes, and the backs of hands. You lift your cup and feel cold droplets strike the tin with tiny clicks. Supper is plain, not unpleasant, necessarily, but plain enough to make you remember every meal you once complained about before the journey. Beans, cornmeal mush, hard bread softened if there is water and patience. Maybe salt pork cut small so its flavour can pretend to be generous. Many Oregon Trail families depended on staples such as flour, bacon, beans, coffee, sugar, and dried fruit, because these kept reasonably well and could survive the long haul if guarded from damp and waste. Fresh vegetables are rare by this stage unless gathered, traded, or carried briefly after a resupply stop. The trail menu is not trying to delight you, it is trying to keep you vertical. You sit on a low box near the wagon wheel, close enough to the fire to receive smoke, but not quite enough heat. Naturally. The flame burns low and orange beneath the pot, licking at wet fuel with a tired little patience. Someone stirs with a spoon whose handle has gone dark from years of use. Steam rises, thin and fragrant, then gets flattened by a cold breath of wind. You follow it with your eyes as if warmth might be something you can catch. A bowl is handed to you. The food is hot at the centre and cooling fast at the edges. You cup it in both hands and let the heat press into your palms. For a moment, you do not eat, you simply hold it, because the bowl is the warmest thing that has willingly touched you all evening. Then you take the first bite. It is thick, simple, smoky, and underseasoned. But your hunger improves it. Hunger is the trail's finest cook. It can turn beans into philosophy. There is an odd little food note hidden in many trail accounts. Some emigrants brought treasured luxuries at the start, including preserved fruits, pickles, spices, or even small treats packed by hopeful relatives, only to discover that fragile jars broke, supplies spoiled, or weight became a tyrant. A family might begin with a dream of civilized dining and later rejoice over a biscuit not gritty with ash. Somewhere, someone may have carefully packed something fashionable and delicate, only for the road to explain that the true delicacy is dry flour. You chew slowly because the evening is asking you to slow down. The wagon train does not move in darkness unless forced. The animals rest, wheels stop. Even anxiety sits for supper. Around you, people become softer shapes. A woman blows across a spoon before feeding a child. A man cuts a strip of pork and hands half of it to someone else without speaking. Two boys argue in whispers over who gets the less dented cup, which is the kind of luxury debate that civilization produces under stress. Nobody has enough, but nearly everyone makes a little room. The rain gives the meal a strange intimacy. It tightens the circle. Beyond the firelight, the prairie disappears, and the world becomes a ring of mud, steam, breath, and low voices. You hear the oxen shifting nearby, their hooves making wet sounds in churned ground. A mule snorts, offended by existence. Someone's kettle lid rattles. A baby lets out one exhausted complaint, then settled again into shawls and warmth. Food on the trail also carried risk in quieter ways. If flour got wet, it could sour or mould. If meat was poorly kept, it could turn dangerous. If supplies ran low, rations tightened and tempers followed. There is scholarly disagreement over how often emigrant hardship came from poor planning rather than unavoidable conditions. Some travellers overloaded wagons with furniture and sentiment, then threw items away as roads worsened. Others planned carefully and were still humbled by storms. Sickness, broken equipment, or unlucky grazing. Tonight, as you scrape the bowl, planning feels important. Yes, but the weather has clearly not read anyone's inventory list. You take another bite, a little grit catches between your teeth. You pause. Is it ash sand, a historical seasoning? Best not to investigate too deeply. The trail has a way of making mystery edible. The coffee, if you get some, is bitter and hot. And that is enough. It smells like courage pretending to be a beverage. You drink carefully, feeling it move down your throat, warming you for a few brief inches. Then the cold gathers again around your back. Someone near the fire starts speaking of the road ahead. Not loudly. Nobody wants a full counsel in the freezing rain. But a few practical words drift through the smoke. How deep the mud may be by morning. Whether the next creek will rise. Whether the weaker ox should be watched. Whether the bedding in one wagon has taken water. This is how worry travels. Not as panic, but as housekeeping. The whole journey is one long list of ordinary tasks with enormous consequences. You look toward your wagon. Its canvas cover glows faintly from the fire. the curved ribs making a shadowed frame beneath the cloth. Water beads along the outside and runs down in crooked paths. It is beautiful in the way uncomfortable things can become beautiful when you're too tired to resist them. The wagon is not home, but it is what home has become. A moving cupboard, a damp nest, a promise on wheels. Your bowl empties slowly. You scrape the bottom and feel a tiny disappointment when there's nothing left. Hunger has not vanished. It has merely been negotiated with around you. The others finish too. Bowls are wiped clean with bits of bread, if any remain. Cups are rinsed with as little water as possible, because even in rain, usable water is not something to waste casually. The fire is encouraged, guarded, and complained about. Wet wood hisses. Smoke thickens. Sparks rise and die almost at once in the damp air. You warm your hands one last time, palms toward the flame, backs prickling in the cold. The heat feels uneven, almost sharp. Your face warms while your shoulders chill. Your knees steam faintly where damp cloth meets firelight. You could sit here forever, except forever would involve pneumonia. And the camp has other plans for you. Soon, the small evening tasks resume. Food must be covered, utensils stowed, fire managed, children guided towards sleep, animals checked once more, and you, full enough to feel heavier, but not warm enough to feel safe, turn back toward the wagon, where the question waits in the cramped dark: who sleeps inside, who sleeps beneath, who sleeps outside? And how does a whole family fold itself into a space already crowded with everything it owns? You return to the wagon with supper still warming your middle, though not nearly enough to impress your feet. The camp behind you murmurs and smokes, but the world inside the canvas is quieter, closer, and more complicated. A person might think sleep is simple. Lie down, close eyes, drift away, very charming, very modern, on this trail. Sleep is a small engineering project performed by exhausted people in near darkness, while the rain keeps testing the roof. You climb in carefully, one hand on the tailgate, one boot searching for a safe patch of floorboard. The wagon shifts beneath your weight, not much, just enough to remind you that this is not a room. It is a wooden box with wheels, springs if you are lucky, and a personality formed entirely from strain. Every board gives a faint groan. A lantern near the front throws a dull gold wash over piled sacks, rolled quilts, a chest, a coffee mill, a spare pair of boots, and the shadowy handle of an axe tucked where it can be reached. The sleeping arrangement is less about comfort than hierarchy, weather, and need in many families travelling west. Adults and older children often walked much of the day rather than ride. Because wagons were packed with supplies and riding added strain to the animals, at night, the wagon might be reserved for young children, the sick, the elderly, delicate valuables, or the driest bedding. Healthy adults frequently slept under the wagon, beside it, or on the ground when weather allowed. Tonight, weather does not allow much of anything, but it is still giving opinions freely. You look at the available space. It has not expanded while you're eating. Rude, but historically consistent. A child is already bundled near the front, placed between a flour sack and a rolled feather tick like a small parcel marked fragile. Another child is curled sideways, one arm over a bundle of clothing. Someone has made a pillow from a folded coat. Someone else has claimed a corner by putting a blanket there earlier, which on the trail is basically a land deed. You lower yourself onto the edge of the bedding and immediately bump your knee against a wooden chest. The chest does not apologize. The wagon bed may be only about 10 feet long, and that length is interrupted by every necessary object your family owns. Food has to stay inside. Tools cannot be left in the rain. Bedding must be kept from mud. Clothing, dishes, medicines, books, and keepsakes all demand shelter too. So the question is not where do you sleep, it is what are you willing to sleep against? A sack of beans, a trunk, a folded tent, a bag of spare horseshoes that quietly despises your ribs. The scene has its funny little domestic truths. Some emigrants packed rocking chairs, clocks, heavy mirrors, or heirloom furniture at the beginning, only to abandon them along the trail when weight became impossible. The road west was famous for creating roadside museums of regret. Imagine crawling into the wagon at night beside grandmother's cherished chair, knowing the oxen are judging everyone. By the time freezing rain falls, almost every object still inside has defended its right to exist. You try to fit your body into a human-shaped gap between a blanket roll and a meal sack. Your shoulder rests against canvas at first, but someone warns you to move inward. Cloth touching the wagon cover may draw dampness through. You shift an inch. That inch matters. Your hip now presses into a ridge beneath the quilt. Perhaps a tool handle, perhaps the corner of a box, perhaps the fossilized remains of your expectations. You decide not to investigate. Outside, some of the men may still be arranging ground covers beneath wagons or spreading blankets in whatever dryish space can be found. A few might sleep sitting up, or wrapped near the fire, or under makeshift shelters if they have the energy to make them, in milder weather. Sleeping under the wagon can be practical, even cozy in a rugged, spider-adjacent way. In freezing rain, the ground turns against the idea. Mud draws warmth from the body. Water runs where it likes. A person under the wagon may be sheltered from direct rain, but not from cold air, splashing, seepage, or the affectionate nearness of livestock. There is some ongoing disagreement among trail scholars about how accurately later memoirs describe sleeping inside wagons, because memory often rearranged hardship into tidy scenes. Diaries written during the journey tend to be brief and practical, while reminiscences decades later sometimes add warmth, drama, or moral meaning. Maybe people remembered sleeping inside more often because that image felt safe. Maybe they remembered the ground less because the body prefers not to keep detailed records of misery. Tonight, with your knees tucked and your blanket edge guarded like treasure, the distinction feels less academic. A woman near you checks each child by touch, forehead, cheek, tucked feet, blanket edge. No grand speech, only small adjustments. The youngest is turned away from the draft. A damp hem is pulled clear of bedding. Someone's shawl becomes extra covering for someone smaller. The social order of warmth is simple. Children first, sick people first. The strongest claim they are fine, because pride is apparently another blanket, though a thin one. You lie back slowly. The ceiling is low, curved, shadowed. Rain taps above your eyes. The wagon smells different now that bodies are inside. Smoke, damp wool, tired breath, leather, food, mud on boots, and the faint sourness of wet canvas all mingle into one trail perfume. Expensive, no. Memorable, unfortunately, yes. Your foot touches another foot. Both withdraw slightly, then settle again because there is nowhere else to go. Someone whispers an apology. Someone tells a child to stop wriggling. The child whispers that something is poking them. Everyone is being poked by something. This is the democratic promise of the wagon. You pull the blanket under your chin. The fabric scratches your skin and holds a faint warmth from earlier use. Beneath your shoulder, the floorboard is hard even through layers. Every time someone shifts, the entire bedding arrangement changes a little. You become aware of the cargo like silent roommates, the flour sack near your knees, the chest at your back, the pot that might roll if not wedged properly, the spare wheel part wrapped in cloth. These are not objects anymore. They are boundaries. A lantern is pinched lower. The glow softens, then fades toward darkness. Without light, sound expands. The rain seems closer. The animals outside seem larger. The wagon canvas breathes with each gust. Someone outside coughs twice. A rope taps against wood. Water slides down the cover with a soft, travelling hiss. You feel the cold boards beneath you and the faint shared warmth of bodies nearby. And you understand why people sometimes chose discomfort over isolation. Privacy would be lovely, yes, but warmth has a persuasive argument. Your mind drifts to your old bed, the one left somewhere back east or in a river town, with its stable floor, its actual walls, its shocking lack of flour sacks. You imagine it almost too clearly, then let it go. Because homesickness has sharp teeth at night. The wagon is what you have. The blanket is what you have. The breathing child near your elbow, the cold canvas above, the mud below, and the whole damp family folded into one narrow shelter are what you have. And as the Last Supper sounds fade outside, the next trouble begins its tiny performance overhead. Because of the rain, patient and clever, is starting to find the seams, the patches, the ropes, and all the little places where canvas promises meet weather's persistence. The first drip lands so softly that you almost pretend it didn't happen. A faint tap against cloth, not outside, where it belongs, but inside, near the rear corner of the wagon. Everyone grows still for half a breath, as though silence might discourage water from becoming ambitious. Then a second drop falls, and the illusion ends. The rain has found a way in. You lift your head. In the dimness, the canvas roof is only a dark curve above you, but you can sense its shape. The bows arch from side to side, holding the cover over the wagon bed like ribs beneath a pale hide. During the dry part of the journey, that cover looked almost cheerful, a billowing cloth sail over the plains. Now it hangs lower, burdened by water, its seams darkened, its edges trembling whenever wind slides under them. Most wagon covers were made from heavy cotton canvas or similar cloth, often stretched over wooden bows and treated to resist rain as best as families could manage. The cover was meant to shed weather, not create a sealed room. That difference matters deeply at midnight in freezing rain. A tent can leak. A wagon cover can leak with personality. You watch another bead gather above a bundle of clothes. It swells, shines briefly in lantern shadow, then drops. Someone moves the bundle with quick hands. A child murmurs sleepily, asking if it is morning. No, dear. Morning would at least have the manners to bring light. This is only water introducing itself. The sound overhead changes with every inch of canvas, where the cloth is tight. Freezing rain clicks sharply, where it has sagged. Drops patter into shallow pools and make a duller sound, almost like fingertips on a drum. Along the seams, water travels in threads. It creeps down stitching, pauses at knots, follows wrinkles, and drips from the lowest point. Water is an excellent student of gravity, annoyingly gifted. You shift your blanket away from the side, the movement disturbs someone's foot, and a whisper of apology passes through the darkness. The wagon has become a puzzle box of people and supplies, and every leak redraws the puzzle. A dry corner is discovered, then lost. A coat becomes a barrier. A tin cup is placed beneath one persistent drip, and the first drop into it rings out brightly, much too cheerful for the situation. Ping, then silence. Ping. There it is, your lullaby. Very elegant. A frontier music box powered by structural disappointment. A small, strange detail from overland travel is that people sometimes used whatever materials they had for emergency repair: scraps of cloth, bits of oilskin, extra rope, wax, grease, or pieces cut from worn garments, a bonnet string, a torn shirt. or a patch from an old sack might suddenly become part of the architecture, on the trail. The line between clothing and construction material could become surprisingly thin. Someone near the opening reaches upward to press the canvas from below, trying to lift a sag so water will roll off instead of pooling. The cloth is cold enough to sting the palm. The pressure works for a moment. Outside, gathered water sloughs away with a wet rush. Then the canvas relaxes again. The wagon gives a faint creak, as if embarrassed. The freezing rain is worse than ordinary rain because it arrives halfway between forms. It touches the surface and begins to harden. It glazes ropes, stiffens canvas edges, and makes knots stubborn. If the cover needs tightening from outside, the person doing it must handle icy rope in the dark, in mud. While trying not to curse loudly enough to educate the children, since we are keeping things gentle, imagine a man outside making several historically authentic but family-filtered noises. You hear him working along the side, the rope scrapes, a peg knocks against wood, a hand slaps the canvas to shake off water, then comes the low grunt of someone pulling hard. The cover tightens slightly above you. The drip near the rear slows. The cup catches one last drop. Ping. Then nothing for a while. You settle back, grateful in the cautious way trail life teaches you to be. Do not celebrate too early. The weather listens. The wagon cover is not only leaking from above, moisture creeps from the sides too. The canvas flaps near the rear opening do not meet perfectly. Wind pushes fine rain through gaps. It dampens a blanket edge, then a trunk, then the hem of someone's garment. You tuck cloth inward. You wedge a rolled coat near the opening. It blocks some draft and absorbs some moisture, sacrificing itself nobly in the grand tradition of outerwear. There is a continuing debate among historians about whether popular images of tidy covered wagons make the overland journey seem more organised and comfortable than it really was. Paintings often show clean canvas, bright skies, and heroic silhouettes. Diaries more often mention broken gear, dust, mud, rain, sickness, lost animals, and the endless work of keeping supplies usable. Tonight, your wagon is not a symbol. It is a damp container full of tired people trying to outwit precipitation. Your senses grow sharper in the dark. You can smell where water touches old wood. It releases a cold, earthy scent, like a barn wall after a storm. The leather harness hanging near the front gives off a deep, bitter smell. Wet wool thickens the air. Someone's hair smells faintly of smoke. A child's breath warms your wrist, then cools almost instantly. The canvas above you flutters, then snaps softly as wind shifts, not a grand crack. More like a tired bedsheet being annoyed. The boughs hold, the ropes hold, you hope the knots hold. A wagon cover can come loose in a hard storm. And though tonight may not be the worst the trail can offer, it is enough to make you aware of every fastening. A drop lands near your cheek. You do not move at first. Perhaps it was imagination. Perhaps your own breath condensed somehow. Perhaps the universe would like to apologize. Then another drop taps the blanket beside your ear. You open your eyes and stare into darkness with deep personal disappointment. The leak is tiny. Falling from a seam above your shoulder, you reach up, fingers searching. The canvas is icy and damp. A bead touches your fingertip. You follow the seam to the bow and press the cloth gently upward, guiding water towards a different path. This is not repair. This is negotiation. You're not defeating the storm. You're merely suggesting that it bother someone less important. Preferably the empty corner near the spare tools. The drip moves. It lands on a wooden box instead. A soft tick. Better. The box can handle it. Probably. You tuck your blanket closer around your neck and feel the damp spot near your shoulder cooling quickly. The body notices small wet places with theatrical intensity. A coin-sized patch becomes a frozen continent if you think about it long enough. So you try not to think about it. Outside, the camp has quieted. Most fires are low, voices have faded. The animals shift and blow warm breath into the wet dark. The wagons stand like dim humped shapes beneath the rain, each one holding its own collection of leaks, worries, and sleeping arrangements. Your family's wagon is only one small shelter among many, but inside it, every drip feels personal. The cup at the rear begins again. Ping. Not often, just enough to remind you that the night is still working. You close your eyes. The tapping overhead becomes layers sharp rain on tight canvas, soft patter in sagging cloth. Occasional drops into tin, water sliding down the outside, rope tapping wood, wind pressing and releasing. It is almost music if you're generous. Very generous. Nearly unconscious. But before sleep can take you fully. A heavier sound comes from beyond the wagon wall. A slow shifting of hooves in mud. A snort. A low animal breath, reminding you that this shelter, leaky as it is, depends on the comfort and survival of the creatures standing outside in the storm. The oxen stand just beyond the wagon, close enough that you can hear their breath thicken the dark. It comes out in slow, damp clouds, warmer than the rain and briefly visible when lantern light catches it. One animal shifts its weight, and the mud answers with a deep, soft suck. Another shakes its head, making the wooden yoke creak and the loose hardware give a small, tired clatter. The sound travels through the canvas and into your bones. You lie still, listening. The wagon may be your shelter, but the animals are the reason it moves at all. Every sack of flour, every blanket, every kettle, every stubborn keepsake, and every person hoping to reach Oregon depends on muscle standing outside in the weather. The great quiet bodies out there are not background scenery. They are transportation, labour, fortune, and risk, wrapped in wet hide. Oxen are patient animals, but patience is not magic. They need rest, grazing, clean enough water, and feet that can keep going over hundreds of miles. Many emigrants favoured oxen because they were steady, strong, and less expensive than horses, and because they could survive on rough forage that would not keep finer animals in good condition. They moved slowly, yes, but slow movement is still movement, and the Oregon Trail is very much a long argument in favour of continuing. A hoof scrapes, a chain clicks, somewhere near the front of the wagon. One ox blows through its nostrils, a wet, rumbling sound full of insult. You cannot blame it. The animal has pulled through mud all day, stood through supper, and now must sleep on cold ground while humans complain inside a canvas tube. If the ox had a diary, it would not be flattering. You hear someone outside, likely one of the men taking another late check. His boots move carefully through the mud. He speaks in a low murmur, not because the ox understands the words exactly, but because tone matters. Animals on the trail learn voices. They learn habits. They learn which hands are rough, which are gentle, which bring feed, which bring trouble. The man pats a wet neck. The sound is dull and affectionate. Hide, hair, rain, palm. There are horses in some companies, and mules too, each with their own talents and opinions. Horses can be quicker and useful for riding or scouting, but they need better feed and can be more tempting to thieves. Mules are hardy and clever, sometimes too clever for the emotional health of everyone involved. Cattle may trail along as walking supplies, milk providers, or future meals, though in weather like this they become one more set of hooves to manage. The camp is not simply people and wagons. It is a moving village with horns, tails, and an impressive amount of manure. One curious detail from the trail is that emigrants sometimes named their oxen and wrote about them with real feeling. Names might be simple pairs like Buck and Bright, or Line and Berry, or something more personal, when an animal died, strayed, or had to be abandoned. Diary entries could be brief, but the loss underneath was heavy. A dead ox was not just sad. It could mean delay, expense, rearranged loads, or a family's whole plan beginning to wobble like a bad wheel. The rain thickens again, a fine glassy whisper. It strikes animal backs and runs in dark lines along their sides. Ox hair sheds some water, but not all. The hide underneath grows cold. If freezing rain glazes the ground, footing becomes dangerous. A slipping ox can injure a leg. A lame animal can slow the whole party. In the daylight, you may fuss over your stockings and wet cuffs, but in the dark you understand that the animal's comfort is not sentimental. It is survival by another name. You pull your blanket closer and remember the yoke you helped lift earlier, the way it seemed to belong to a world of heavy, practical objects, wooden yokes, iron chains, bows, pins, straps, lines. None of it is elegant, and all of it matters. If a strap freezes stiff, morning work becomes slower. If a rope snaps, someone must repair it with numb fingers. If a hungry animal wanders, the whole camp may wake into panic. So even at night, even in rain, the animals remain part of everyone's thoughts. There is still room for uncertainty in the records about how emigrants balanced animal care with human exhaustion. Because many diaries mention livestock mainly when problems occurred. A good night of grazing might earn no sentence at all. A lost cow might earn 3. A lame ox might fill a whole morning with worry. So when later readers try to reconstruct ordinary care, they must listen around the silences. Tonight, those silences stand outside your wagon, breathing steadily in the rain. You hear a rope tighten against a peg. The animal tied to it shifts, then settles. The rope fibers scrape, wet and rough. The peg holds, somewhere farther off. A horse stamps. The sound is sharper than an ox hoof, more nervous, followed by the small jingle of tack. Someone hushes it. The horse snorts, perhaps dreaming of a barn, perhaps merely annoyed that the sky continues falling. You smile into the dark. Barely. Animals do not share human ambitions. They do not care about land claims, fertile valleys, or the promise of a new farm beyond the mountains. They care about grass, footing, water, warmth, and the absence of flies, which is a beautifully honest political platform. Yet their bodies carry human dreams westward. Their patience is braided into every mile. The smell of them seeps into the wagon whenever the wind changes. Wet hide, manure, trampled grass, leather harness, and the warm, grassy breath of cud being worked slowly in the mouth. It is not clean, but it is grounding. The animal smell says that camp is alive. It says the wagons are not abandoned shapes in the dark. It says morning may still happen, because the creatures that pull morning forward are still standing. A child near you stirs and whispers something about the oxen, perhaps asking if they are cold. Someone answers softly that they are all right. It is meant to soothe the child, but you listen to the answer too. All right is a flexible phrase on the trail. It means not dead, not lost, not yet beyond help. It means still here. The wagon rocks faintly as wind nudges it. Outside, an ox leans or turns, and the harness hanging near the side taps wood. The animal's slow chewing resumes, a damp grinding rhythm, calm almost to the point of wisdom. You begin to match your breathing to it. Inhale with the rain. Exhale with the ox. The night becomes less empty when shared with large, patient creatures. Then another sound rises, farther out beyond the nearest animals, and not loud, perhaps only a branch settling under ice, or a loose object shifting in the mud, or someone from another wagon making a final round. Still, your mind notices it. In a camp where animals are wealth, where darkness hides distance, where every family carries food, tools, and fear under canvas. One unexplained sound can open the door to every worry waiting beyond the wagon. The sound beyond the animals comes again, or perhaps you only expect it to. That is one of the night's little tricks, once your mind has opened the door to worry. Every ordinary noise walks in wearing a suspicious hat. A rope creaks, and it might be wind. A hoof shifts, and it might be a startled animal. A low murmur from another wagon might be a prayer, a complaint, or someone discovering that their blanket is now a sponge with family responsibilities. You lie still inside the wagon, eyes open to darkness. The canvas above you is almost invisible now, except where a faint greyness gathers along the curve of a bow. Rain continues its tiny assault. Drip, patter, slide, ping into the tin cup. The sounds that seemed merely irritating a few minutes ago now form a screen behind which anything could be moving. The prairie outside is not empty. It only refuses to show itself. Fear on the trail is rarely one single monster. It is a crowded room. Illness sits in one corner. Injury leans against the wall. Weather crouches by the door. Lost animals, broken wheels, swollen rivers, hunger, quarrels, and plain bad luck all find seats. The popular imagination often reaches first for attacks, because danger with a face is easier to dramatize. But for many emigrants, the most persistent threats were disease, accidents, exhaustion, and environmental hardship. Cholera, especially in some years, could move through wagon trains with terrifying speed, and even a common fever could become serious when the nearest doctor was far behind or far ahead. Tonight, though, your fear is smaller and closer. It is the cough 2 wagons over, the ache in your own throat, the memory of a child who seemed flushed at supper, the thought that damp bedding and freezing air might turn discomfort into sickness. You press your tongue to the roof of your mouth and swallow. Are you becoming ill? No. Probably not. Maybe. Wonderful bedtime question. Very relaxing. Outside, someone coughs again, a slow cough. Not dramatic, but deep enough to make you listen. You imagine the person wrapped in a coat near a dying fire, trying not to wake others. You imagine wet boots, chilled fingers, breath cutting through a sore chest on the trail. There is no soft separation between private symptoms and public concern. If one person weakens, tasks shift. If many weaken, the train slows. A cough can become everyone's problem by morning. Then there are thieves, or rumours of thieves, which are sometimes almost as powerful. A wagon train carries animals, tools, food, weapons, cloth, and money. But livestock is the treasure easiest to walk away on 4 legs. Travellers worried about animals straying or being stolen, and night watches were often arranged when danger seemed likely or when the company wanted reassurance. A horse taken in the dark could be more than a loss. It could be transportation, scouting, pride. An emergency speed disappearing into wet blackness. A strange little item from the wider overland world is the grave alarm of reputation. Not an actual bell beside the dead, thankfully, but the habit of judging strangers by what earlier travellers had said about them. Stories travelled faster than wagons. A certain crossing might be called dangerous for weeks after one bad accident. A trader might be praised or cursed by name down the line. A rumour of theft could turn every unfamiliar shadow into evidence. The trail was a long road, yes, but also a gossip network with mud. You hear a man outside clear his throat, his footsteps come nearer, then pass. He is likely part of the watch, or simply someone checking an animal, or possibly a person who had to leave his blanket because nature has no respect for freezing rain. He moves slowly, boots pulling from the mud with wet reluctance. The sound fades toward the next wagon. No alarm follows, no shout, no sudden animal panic. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Still, your mind continues working. The wagon cover is thin. You know this because water has already proved it. Canvas keeps out some weather and almost no imagination. Beyond it could be a stranger, a wolf, a loose mule, a falling branch, or nothing more dramatic than a tired neighbour stepping badly in darkness. Nothing is rarely convincing. Wolves and coyotes existed along the route, and their calls could unsettle travellers, especially those from towns or settled farms. Actual attacks on large wagon camps were not the nightly horror that fiction sometimes suggests, but animals moving in the dark could frighten livestock or scavenge around camp. You listen for a howl and hear only rain. Somehow that is both better and not better. At least a howl announces itself. Rain just keeps talking over everything. Researchers disagree about how emigrant fear of native peoples compared with the actual frequency of violent encounters along the Oregon Trail, especially in different years and regions. Many diaries show anxiety shaped by rumour, prejudice, and previous conflicts, while the greater day-to-day dangers often came from disease, accidents, river crossings, and poor conditions. Native communities were diverse, with many encounters involving trade, guidance, diplomacy, curiosity, tension, or avoidance. But lying in a wagon in 1849, you do not possess a modern historian's careful distance. You possess wet socks, limited information, and a nervous imagination. That combination is not known for fairness. The freezing rain keeps you physically present, whenever your thoughts wander too far into possible catastrophe. A cold spot on the blanket brings you back. The damp patch by your shoulder has grown colder. Your feet have found each other under the covers and are doing their best to share disappointment. The tin cup at the leak rings once. Ping. You almost laugh. The sound is so small compared with all the fears you have just entertained. Cholera, theft, wolves, war, injury, rivers, starvation, and here is one drop of water, confidently striking tin as though it deserves a chapter of its own. Maybe it does. Maybe history is often built from such small interruptions. Someone inside the wagon shifts. A child whimpers in sleep. A hand reaches across the bedding and pats gently until the child quiets. No one speaks. The touch is enough. Outside, the watchman's steps return faintly, then stop near the oxen. A low murmur, a rope adjusted, the oxen breathe on. You think of the road already travelled, the graves past, the abandoned furniture, the broken pieces left beside the track. You think of rivers ahead, mountains ahead, weather ahead, and the strange boldness of lying here at all. People later may speak of the Oregon Trail as adventure, destiny, migration, settlement, or national expansion. Those words are large and dry. Tonight, the truth is wet, cramped, and listening. Another sound comes from the dark, and this time you know what it is. A wagon wheel settling deeper into mud. A slow wooden groan, followed by a squelch. Not danger, not exactly. Just the ground reminding everyone that it is still participating. You close your eyes again. Fear does not vanish, but it softens at the edges. The camp has watches. The animals are near. The family breathes around you. The wagon leaks, but it stands. The rain continues, but it has not carried you away. You're not safe in the modern sense. You are only held for the moment by cloth, wood, tired people, and routine. And in that fragile holding, another kind of pressure waits for morning and for every night after it, the pressure of living so closely with others that even fear must be shared politely, and every whisper, cough, prayer complaint, and kindness becomes part of the wagon train's social weather. The wagon is full of people trying not to disturb one another, which means everyone disturbs one another very carefully. A knee shifts in darkness, then freezes. A blanket edge is tugged, then released when someone else inhales sharply. A child turns over with the soft violence of sleep and plants one cold heel against your shin. You accept it in silence, because the child is smaller, and because on the trail. Justice often gives way to logistics. Privacy is one of the first luxuries the road takes from you. Back in a settled home, you might have had a room, or at least a corner that behaved like yours. Here, your private world is the space between your face and the blanket. Even that is negotiable if the blanket belongs to the family supply. You hear breathing from every direction. Slow adult breathing. Uneven child breathing. Someone's nose beginning to whistle faintly. Someone else trying to stop a cough and failing by degrees. The wagon train is not only a line of vehicles, it is temporary society, made from families, neighbours, strangers, agreements, habits, grudges, borrowed tools, shared fires, and opinions about how everyone else should behave. Many emigrant companies elected captains or formed rules for travel, guarding, grazing, camping, and resolving disputes. Not every group was equally formal, but even a loose train needed coordination. When to start, when to stop, who stands watch, where animals graze. Who gets help when a wagon breaks? These are not small matters when the nearest town is a memory and the next river does not care about your schedule. You turn your head slightly and smell damp wool, smoke, and the faint sour warmth of crowded bodies. It is not unpleasant in the way a dirty alley is unpleasant. It is intimate, human, unavoidable. You know too much about everyone's tiredness. By morning, everyone will know too much about yours if you snore, mutter, cry, complain, oversleep, drop a cup, or step into mud up to the ankle while half the camp watches. The news will travel with the wagons. Reputation does not need a newspaper. It has breakfast. A small oddity from trail life is how often social order depended on borrowed domestic rituals. People still tried to keep Sunday observances when possible, still washed faces when water and weather allowed, still mended cuffs, still taught children manners, still worried about who was lazy, who was generous, who was too proud, who talked too much, and who somehow always appeared at supper when someone else's pot was full. Civilization did not vanish on the prairie. It put on muddy boots and became nosier. Inside the wagon, someone whispers your name, or perhaps only breathes in a way that sounds like it. You murmur back. A hand passes a folded cloth toward you. Then another hand intercepts it because it was meant for a child. A tiny confusion follows, settled by touch rather than words. Nobody wants to wake the whole family. The darkness makes everyone gentler, at least for now. Beyond the canvas, the camp is arranged by necessity and by trust. You know which family has the spare chain. You know who owns the nervous mule. You know which woman has a remedy for stomach trouble and which man overestimates his ability to repair wheels. You know who lost a cup at the last creek and who suspects it was not lost so much as borrowed without the blessing of return. These details matter because wagon train life is made of dependence. You may not adore every neighbour, but when your ox strays, your axle cracks, or your child runs a fever, affection becomes less important than assistance. Researchers continue to question how much unity existed in many overland groups beneath the later glow of pioneer memory. Some diaries show cooperation, shared labour, elected order, and religious fellowship. Others reveal quarrels over pace, grazing, leadership, debts, insults, Sabbath travel, animals, and discipline. The same company could be neighbourly at dawn and deeply irritated by noon. Tonight. The freezing rain edits the argument. Everyone is too cold to debate philosophy. But the old tensions sleep lightly. A child asks for water. The request moves through the wagon like a small emergency. Where is the cup, not the leaking cup? That one is performing public service near the rear. Another cup is found by touch, then filled from a covered container that someone has kept close. The child drinks, gulps too loudly, and is hushed. A little water spills on the bedding. Several adults experience spiritual collapse in silence. The wet spot is dabbed with the seriousness of a battlefield maneuver. You feel the pressure of manners even now. Do not take more blanket than your share. Do not complain too much. Do not frighten the children. Do not suggest turning back unless you want your words to haunt supper for 3 weeks. If you are young, you're expected to help. If you are grown, you are expected to endure. If you're elderly, ill, pregnant, or injured, the rules shift, but never enough to make the trail kind. Kindness comes from people, not conditions. The rain whispers along the canvas. The oxen breathe outside somewhere. 2 men exchange low words near a fire that has nearly died. One voice has the clipped tone of disagreement. The other answers softly, perhaps trying not to invite witnesses. You cannot make out the issue. Guard duty, morning start time, a missing tool, whether one wagon has taken more than its share of dry fuel on the trail. Any object can become moral evidence. A rope is never just a rope if someone else needed it. Yet there is comfort too, because closeness is not only burden. When the wind presses hard against the wagon, several bodies tense together, then ease together. When a child whimpers, someone responds before the sound becomes crying. When a drip starts near the bedding, 3 hands move in the dark. You are crowded, yes, but not abandoned. You are watched over by people who may annoy you profoundly by daylight, which is still, in its own flawed way, a blessing. You remember the little roadside museums of regret, abandoned chairs and trunks along the trail, and wonder whether privacy was one of the invisible things left there too. No one could toss it from a wagon. But perhaps it fell away mile by mile. In its place came a different skill living beside others without splintering apart, learning when to speak, when to swallow a complaint, when to laugh softly, when to pass the last dry cloth to someone colder than you. A woman near the front begins a quiet prayer, barely above breath. Not everyone joins, not everyone sleeps, not everyone believes in the same way, but no one interrupts. The words blend with rain until they are more rhythm than language. Petition, gratitude, worry, habit, a request for safe passage through a night that is not done with you. The wagon settle again. Mud sucks softly below the wheels. The leaking cup gives one bright ping, then rests. Your cold foot brushes the child's foot, and this time neither of you moves away. Warmth, like reputation, travels by contact. So does discomfort. So does courage, though it is harder to name. You lie there inside the social weather of the train, held between irritation and tenderness, rules and need, whispers and silence. Outside, the dark camp keeps its fragile order. Inside, the family folds itself smaller, softer, quieter, and as the hours deepen, the next battle becomes humble and bodily cold feet, stiff hands, damp stockings, and the small remedies people trust when the night offers no mercy and sleep must be coaxed rather than commanded. The cold gathers first in your feet, because feet are honest and dramatic. You can pretend your shoulders are fine. You can tell yourself the damp sleeve is merely unpleasant. You can even ignore the hard ridge beneath your hip for a while, though it is clearly plotting against you. But your feet report directly to the soul. They send sharp little messages from beneath the blanket, each one saying, in its own frosty language, that the situation is unacceptable. You bend your knees and draw your feet closer. The child beside you makes a sleepy protesting sound. So you adjust again, slower this time. Space is scarce. Warmth is scarcer. You press one foot against the other, then tuck them under the edge of your skirt or trousers, trying to trap whatever heat remains. It is not much. Your toes feel like small, separate travellers who may form their own wagon company and leave. The damp stocking you removed earlier hangs somewhere near the wagon bow, not drying so much as contemplating the concept of drying. Your other stocking is still on, and that may have been a mistake. It is cold enough to feel damp, even if it is not truly wet. Fabric against skin becomes treacherous in weather like this. A dry layer protects. A damp layer steals warmth patiently, quietly, like a polite thief. Families on the trail relied on simple methods to keep warm at night: layered wool blankets, quilts, cloaks, shawls, shared body heat, and whatever dryness they could defend. There were no insulated sleeping bags, no synthetic fleece, no miraculous little heat packs to crack open and tuck into your boots. You had cloth, fire, stones, common sense, and endurance. Endurance, sadly, does not feel very warm around midnight. Someone near the front of the wagon whispers that a stone is ready, earlier, while the fire still held a little strength. A smooth stone had been placed near the heat, not in the flames where it might crack or burn cloth, but close enough to gather warmth. Now it is wrapped in a scrap of fabric and passed inward with careful hands. You receive it like a sacred relic. It is not hot. It is warm, which is more precious. You hold it between your palms and feel heat seep into your fingers. The warmth is solid, modest, and fading. But oh, how your body welcomes it. You slide it toward your feet, wrapped securely so it will not scorch skin or bedding. The stone settles under the blanket like a tiny domestic sun. Your toes approach cautiously, then worship. This was no fantasy of frontier comfort. Heated stones, bricks, or bed warmers were used in many cold households long before the trail, and emigrants brought similar habits with them when possible. A wrapped stone from the fire could help warm bedding or chilled feet, provided no one was careless enough to burn cloth, crack the stone, or set the family's entire sleeping arrangement into a smoky little tragedy. Nothing says restful evening like accidentally making your blanket smell even more like disaster. You flex your toes beside the stone. Life returns slowly, prickling and not entirely pleasant. Warmth can hurt when cold has settled deep. You breathe through it, eyes half closed, listening to the rain. The canvas no longer sounds like a roof. It sounds like 1,000 small fingers tapping time. The leak in the cup has slowed again. The ping comes only now and then, just enough to remind you that the wagon is still learning how to be a bedroom. A woman nearby rubs a child's feet between her hands. The motion is brisk but gentle. Heel, arch, toes, then the other foot. The child sighs in sleep, deeply pleased with civilization. Another adult pulls a shawl over 2 bodies rather than one. You feel a blanket being shifted over your ankles. It may not be yours. You do not ask on a night like this. Ownership becomes softer. A corner of warmth is borrowed, lent, reclaimed, shared again. There is disagreement among researchers about how much practical medical knowledge emigrant families carried and how effective their home remedies really were. Some treatments were sensible, such as rest, warmth, cleanliness when possible, and careful nursing. Others belonged more to inherited belief, local custom, or hopeful imagination. People used poultices, teas, salves, patent medicines, camphor, laudanum, mustard plasters, and other remedies with varying results. Tonight, nobody's debating theory. If it warms the feet and does not poison anyone, it gains approval. Your hands are next. You tuck one under your arm, then the other beneath the blanket. The skin across your knuckles feels dry despite all the wetness around you, cracked from cold, work, and ash. You rub them together slowly. The friction makes a faint rasp. A little warmth blooms and fades. You curl your fingers into your palms and imagine holding the supper bowl again. That small tin circle of heat. Hunger has quieted, but the memory of warmth remains almost edible. Outside, the fire collapses with a soft sigh. You hear it through the canvas, a faint settling of charred fuel. Someone steps near it, perhaps banking the coals, perhaps making sure nothing spreads. Wet ground helps, at least. The camp will not easily burn tonight. It will merely soak, freeze, and complain. One must be grateful for the variety. The old trick of keeping tomorrow's clothes under a blanket or near the body becomes tempting. A shirt or pair of stockings tucked close might be less icy by morning, but anything too damp near you can chill you further, and anything too close to sleeping children will be kicked into mysterious positions by dawn. You fold one nearly dry cloth and place it near your middle, where body heat may keep it tolerable. Future you may be grateful. Future you is often demanding. You think of the road's little absurdities. A family might cross hundreds of miles with a treasured book, a coffee grinder, a packet of seeds, or a china cup wrapped against breakage, while also lacking enough dry socks for everyone to feel human. This is not stupidity. It is the strange arithmetic of migration. People carry usefulness, memory, hope, habit, and identity, all in the same wagon. Sometimes the socks lose to the teacup. Later, the toes file a complaint. The warm stone cools by degrees. You feel it happening and try not to resent it. Heat is always temporary out here. Fire becomes coals. Coffee becomes bitterness at the bottom of a cup. A held hand grows cold when released, yet temporary warmth is still warmth. The whole night is built from these brief rescues. You shift again, finding a position where the stone touches both feet and the blanket traps the heat. Your knees ache, your back is stiff, but the worst edge of cold has dulled. Around you, the wagon's breaths deepen. Someone has finally fallen asleep. Someone else is pretending to sleep, which is an honourable trail skill. The child's foot presses your shin again. Warmer now. You leave it there. The remedies are small, almost laughably small against the freezing rain. A stone, a shawl, dry cloth, shared breath, hands around feet. But the trail is made of small things repeated until they become survival. One more knot tightened, one more meal cooked, one more damp blanket turned, one more child warmed, one more morning reached. Your eyes drift closed, the rain taps and slides. The oxen shift outside. The stone rests between your feet, losing heat but giving what it has. Your body, still cold, begins to believe sleep might be possible, at least in pieces, yet just as the mind softens. The night grows louder in all the places you cannot control, and the sounds that keep you awake begin arranging themselves around you like a slow, uneasy orchestra. The night does not become quiet, it only changes instruments. At first, you think you're listening to rain, and yes, the rain is still there, steady and fine, tapping across the canvas with that chilly little persistence it has perfected. But after a while, you begin to hear everything beneath it. The wagon creaks when the wind presses the cover. The ropes tighten and relax. The wooden boughs complain softly. A loose metal hook taps once, waits, taps again, as if it has been assigned to measure your remaining patience. You lie on your side with the cooling stone near your feet, your blanket tucked under your chin, your hip still introduced too firmly to the floorboards. Sleep approaches, considers the scene, and walks away with a polite excuse. You cannot blame it. This is not a bedroom. This is a percussion chamber filled with cargo and relatives. The canvas snaps slightly overhead, not a sharp crack, but a wet flap, followed by a shiver along the wagon cover. The ropes answer with a low humming scrape. Outside. Rain slides down the cloth and drips from the wagon's edge into mud. You can hear the drops strike puddles with different tones depending on depth. Tiny ticks on shallow water, soft plops where the ground has opened into deeper hoof prints. The prairie has become a wet drum, and everyone is invited to its extremely unpopular concert. Covered wagons were built to move supplies across rough country, not to provide silent rest. Their wheels, axles, chains, bows, pegs, and cargo all made noise as wood swelled, metal chilled, and weight shifted, even while stopped. A wagon could creak, settle, and mutter in changing weather. The idea of a silent night on the trail is a lovely one, probably invented by someone indoors. A cough starts in the wagon behind yours. It is muffled by canvas and distance, but still clear enough to count. 1, 2. A pause. 3. Then a low voice says something comforting. The cough quiets. You stare into darkness and wait to see if it returns. It does not, at least not yet. Nearby, one of the oxen shifts. Its hoof pulls from mud with a thick sound, then comes down again. Leather creaks where harness has been hung or laid nearby. A chain gives a single link jingle. Then the animal exhales, long and wet. You picture its broad head lowered, eyes half closed, rain jeweled across its hide. The sound is calming in its way. Large animals have a slow rhythm that can make human worries seem overeager. Then a mule farther off decides to object to something, a snort, a stamp, a little shake of tack. Someone hushes it from the dark. The mule is not impressed. Mules, famous for endurance and intelligence, were also famous for having opinions. And many travellers learned that stubborn sometimes meant the animal understood danger before the human did. Of course, sometimes stubborn meant stubborn. History should not flatter the mule too much. It would enjoy that. A faint whisper passes through your wagon. Someone asks whether the leak has stopped. Someone else answers that it has slowed. This is technically good news, presented in the tone of a doctor unwilling to promise recovery. The cup at the rear obliges with one bright ping, destroying the mood. You almost laugh again, but you keep it inside, where it can be warm. The sounds make shapes in your imagination. Wheels groaning in mud become memories of the day's road. Rain striking canvas becomes fingers. Ropes become snakes, branches, voices. The mind, deprived of light, becomes a theatre with this terrible lighting and excellent sound design. Every creak wants a story. Every tap suggests intent. You try to sort them patiently. Wagon sound, animal sound, human sound, weather sound, unknown sound. Unknown sound receives far too much attention. Students of trail life still disagree about how emigrants experience night psychologically, because written records often reduce long hours of listening to a few plain words called night. Rainy night, poor sleep. A diary might say rained all night and move on, while the body that lived those hours knew each drip, each cough, each startled animal. The record is small because the night was large. Paper could not hold all that waiting. You listen to your own breath. It is louder when your ear is pressed near the blanket. The wool rubs softly against your cheek. Somewhere near your knees, a sack settles with a grainy sigh. Perhaps flour, perhaps beans. Cargo makes its own noises. 2. A pot shifts against a wooden box. A spoon slides a fraction. The entire family's possessions are asleep and restless at the same time. Outside, the wind turns and the rain angle changes. Now the drops strike the side of the wagon more than the top, pattering along the canvas wall near your head. A cold draught slips through the rear flap. It touches your neck like a curious finger. You tuck the blanket tighter and wonder how a gap so small can feel so personally hostile. Someone in another wagon begins humming, barely audible. The tune is slow, perhaps a hymn, perhaps a lullaby, perhaps nothing formal at all. The voice wavers, then steadies. It is not performance. It is self-defense. Sound against darkness. Breath against worry. A little human thread stitched through rain. This, too, belongs to the history of the trail music, prayer, recitation, and storytelling travelled with emigrants. Not every night became a fireside gathering, especially not in freezing rain, but people carried songs and familiar words as portable shelter. A remembered tune took no wagon space. It weighed nothing. It could not be ruined by mud unless the singer was deeply unlucky. The humming fades for a moment. The camp seems almost peaceful. Rain, ox breath, canvas, a cough far away, a child turning under quilts, your own heartbeat slowing. Then a wheel nearby gives a long, low wooden groan as the wagon settles further into the mud. Everyone inside pauses. No one speaks. The groan ends with a soft squelch beneath the tire. You imagine the wheel sinking just enough to make mourning miserable. Not disastrous, perhaps, but difficult. The kind of difficulty that begins before breakfast and gives everyone a chance to display character against their will. The night resumes. It always does. A sound rises, is judged, becomes ordinary, and sinks back into the rain. You repeat this process until your thoughts blur. The orchestra has not stopped, but you stop naming each instrument. The tapping becomes texture. The creaking becomes breathing. The animals become part of the earth. The wagon becomes not silent, never silent, but familiar enough to trust for a few minutes at a time. Your eyelids grow heavy. The cooling stone still rests by your feet. Less warm now, but comforting because it is there. The child beside you exhales through the nose, a tiny whistle, somewhere outside. A watchman shifts his coat. The rain softens, then strengthens, then softens again. Sleep comes in scraps, a minute here, a drifting thought there. You do not fall into it so much as wade, ankle deep, then knee deep, then pulled back by a ping, a cough, a hoof, a creak. But each return is slower. The sounds that kept you awake become the sounds that carry you unevenly toward rest. And while the camp breathes under freezing rain, while wagons settle and animals dream their animal dreams, some people are still not sleeping at all, because after the bowls are cleaned and the children are tucked and the blankets are shared, there is hidden work left in the dark, and much of it falls into women's hands. The hidden work begins in motions so small you might miss them if you were fully asleep. A hand reaches toward a child's blanket and tucks it under a shoulder. A damp stocking is lifted from the wrong place and moved toward a drier one. A kettle is nudged farther from the edge of a box. A shawl is spread across two sleepers instead of one. The wagon remains dark, but care keeps moving through it. You open your eyes just enough to see a shape near the front, bent low beneath the canvas. It is likely your mother, or an older sister, or another woman whose day should have ended hours ago but has not. Her outline shifts carefully among sacks and bundles. She knows the wagon by touch. She knows which board creaks, which cup rolls, which child wakes if jostled. She moves with the quiet patience of someone who has learned that sleep is not a right on the trail. It is something negotiated after everyone else has been made less miserable. Women on the overland trails often carried a brutal double load they walked, cooked, washed, nursed, mended, managed children, preserved family goods, and tried to maintain domestic order in conditions that were almost designed to defeat it. Men's labour was heavy and essential too, especially with animals, repairs, driving, guarding, and road work. But the bedtime labour inside and around the wagon often gathered around women. The day ended for the animals when they were unyoked, for many women. The day simply changed rooms. A needle flashes once in the lantern's weak light, not bright, just a dull silver blink. A tear in a sleeve must be closed before it grows. A button must be secured. A child's garment, muddy at the hem, is checked and folded. You hear thread pulled through fabric with the faintest whisper. It is a dry little sound in a wet world, and oddly soothing. Stitch, pause, stitch, pause. There is no dramatic music for mending. There should be. Perhaps a very slow fiddle, played respectfully. One small, surprising thing, some women kept diaries on the trail despite exhaustion, writing by firelight, lantern, or fading dusk, recording births, deaths, weather, quarrels, jokes, river crossings, recipes, and private sorrow in spare lines. A few pages might hold a whole emotional weather system under words as plain as rained all night. Imagine doing all this labour, then sitting with cold fingers to write down the day so the future can pretend it understands. A child stirs near your elbow. The woman pauses before the child fully wakes. Her hand arrives first, resting on the blanket, then smoothing hair away from the forehead. The child settles. No words. The body recognizes comfort before language does. Outside. The rain presses the canvas and inside. That hand keeps one small person from rising into fear. You feel the shape of the evening differently now. Supper was not simply supper, it was planning, rationing, feeding, warming, cleaning, saving, and preventing waste. Bedding was not simply bedding, it was inventory, weather defense, moral debate, and triage. A wet cuff meant work later. A missing sock meant cold feet at dawn. A child's cough meant listening all night. This is domestic labour stretched across a continent, and it does not become less important because it happens quietly. There is still discussion among social historians about how the trail altered women's roles, whether it temporarily expanded authority through necessity or intensified existing expectations under harsher conditions. Some women recorded frustration, grief, and resentment at being dragged west. Others express purpose, religious conviction, practical pride, or fierce commitment to their families' futures. Many likely felt several things at once. Because human beings have always been inconveniently complex, tonight, the answer is not a theory. It is a woman sewing in the dark while freezing rain taps above her head. She checks the hanging garments. One stocking is turned. A damp cloth is moved away from bedding. A coat is lifted, sniffed perhaps, judged, then folded in a new place. The wagon smells of wet wool and smoke, but she can read those smells like labels. Too damp, dry enough, needs airing. Keep from the flower, keep from the child, keep from the leak that migrated earlier like a tiny enemy army. You pretend to sleep because watching someone work while you lie under a blanket feels rude. Yet you keep sensing her movements. She reaches past you to adjust the warm stone, though it is barely warm now. She wraps it more securely so it does not chill your feet directly. Even a cooling stone requires management. Everything requires management. The trail is basically a university of inconvenient objects. Outside, a male voice murmurs near the oxen, then fades. The watch continues, but inside, another watch is kept. A woman listens for a fever, for restless breathing, for dripping water, for a child needing the chamber pot, for the sound of something falling, for the dangerous silence that says a little one may have kicked off the blankets. This watch has no official schedule. Nobody elects a captain of damp socks. Yet the work is constant. The mending continues, a thread breaks, you hear a soft sigh, not angry, only tired. The needle is threaded again, that act alone, in dim light, with chilled fingers, deserves a monument, a very small monument, perhaps shaped like a thimble, placed somewhere warm and dry. Visitors could stand before it and whisper, honestly, fair enough. The rain slows for a few minutes, and the quieter air reveals other hidden labour around camp. Someone rinses a pot with minimal water, someone banks coals, someone moves a saddle or harness to a better spot, someone checks on a sick traveller in another wagon. A woman's low voice gives instructions, calm and definite. Another voice answers, "The trail does not sleep as one body, it dozes in shifts, with care passing from hand to hand." You think of the social rules from earlier, the whispered disagreements, the pressure of reputation. Women's work is judged too. Is a family neat? Are children cared for? Is food wasted? Is clothing repaired? Is the wagon orderly? These judgments can be unfair, especially when rain, mud, hunger, and exhaustion are all contributing their special talents. Still, order matters because disorder can become danger. A misplaced tool delays morning. A wet blanket chills a child. Spoiled food sickens everyone. Domestic skill is not decoration, it is infrastructure, just softer to the touch. At last, the needle is tucked away, the repaired cloth is folded, the lantern is lowered until its glow is almost nothing. The woman eases herself down among the rest of you, finding a narrow space that no one else would call a space. She pulls part of a blanket over her legs. Not enough. Probably, because someone smaller has more. Her body settles slowly, as if each joint must be persuaded. For a moment, no one moves. The rain resumes its fine ticking. The animals breathe outside. The wagon smells of smoke, damp canvas, wool, and the faint warmth of people kept alive by attention. You feel the blanket near your feet, the folded cloth by your side, the patched sleeve placed ready for morning. You understand that sleep in this wagon is not only something you take, it is something someone has made possible for you, stitch by stitch, tuck by tuck, watch by watch. And as her breathing finally begins to slow, your own thoughts drift toward the reason all of this has been endured, the far-off promise that waits beyond mud and weather Oregon, with its imagined orchards, fields, security, and a future that tonight feels both beautifully near and impossibly far. Oregon waits in your mind like a warm room you've never entered. You lie in the wagon while freezing rain stitches the canvas above you, and the word itself, Oregon, seems almost too soft for the night around it. It carries orchards, green valleys, wide claims, rich soil, mild winters if the stories are feeling generous, and a life where a person might finally stop measuring hope by the dryness of a sock. You picture a cabin with a real roof. You picture smoke rising from a chimney that belongs to you. You picture a field cleared by your own hands. Though naturally, in the dream version, your hands are less cracked and your back is much more cooperative. The promise of Oregon has many shapes depending on who is imagining it. For some emigrants, it is land. For others, health, opportunity, debt relief, family connection, or the chance to become somebody slightly grander than the person they were back east or in the border states. By 1849, thousands had already travelled the overland routes toward Oregon and California, and the movement west had become part of a larger American hunger for land, trade, settlement, and reinvention. That sounds impressive in a history book inside the wagon. It sounds like rain landing very close to your ear. You close your eyes and try to build the future out of sensory details. Grass higher than your knees, fruit trees, a garden behind the cabin, clean sheets lifted from a line in dry sunlight, a bed that does not contain a flour sack, a kettle, and 3 sleeping relatives arranged like badly packed laundry. You imagine opening a door and not seeing prairie dark, animal breath, and mud. You imagine the astonishing luxury of leaving something outside and finding it there in the morning, not frozen. Stolen, soaked, or chewed. Then the wagon creaks and brings you back. The floorboard presses your hip. A child breathes against your sleeve. The cooled stone near your feet is now only a lump. The future may be shining somewhere beyond the mountains, but tonight it has not sent blankets. The Oregon donation land law will not be passed until 1850 after this cold night, but the dream of land is already powerful in 1849. Families have heard promises and reports, some accurate, some polished by distance. Land fever has a way of simplifying the unknown. It turns river crossings, broken axles, hard berths, buried loved ones, and freezing rain into footnotes beneath the great heading of worth it. Very persuasive, that phrase. Also suspiciously easy to say after the blankets are dry. There is a strange little trail habit of measuring progress not only in miles, but in discarded things. A chair left beside the road, a trunk split open, books, stoves, feather beds, tools, barrels, maybe even a piano in the more dramatic stories, abandoned when weight became too costly. The road to the future is bordered by pieces of the past. You remember those objects in the mud, silent and oddly personal. Each one says someone once believed I was necessary. Each one says the dream grew heavier than the wagon could bear. You wonder what you would abandon if asked. A second blanket, a keepsake, a book, the blue plate someone loves, pride. Fear. The trail asks this question again and again, though not always in words. What do you carry forward? And what must be left to weather? Outside, one of the oxen shifts, and the wagon answers with a faint tremor. Your dream of Oregon changes shape. It is no longer just fields and sunlight. It includes the animals. If they survive, it includes the women sewing in darkness, the men checking wheels in rain, the children learning to sleep through discomfort as if that were a school subject. It includes all the labour required to make a promised land real, rather than merely picturesque. Writers and historians continue to wrestle with how to balance emigrants' hopes against the consequences of westward expansion for native peoples already living in those regions. The families in wagons often saw themselves as seeking survival, prosperity, or God's guidance. Indigenous communities experienced the arrival of settlers through pressure on land, resources, sovereignty, and lifeways. Both truths belong to the story, though they do not sit easily together in your cold wagon. You may not think in such broad terms. You think of your family, your land, your future, but history, patient and uncomfortable, knows there are other families and other futures beneath the same rain. The canvas drips again, not on you this time, but somewhere near the rear. The cup answers faintly. Ping. You let the sound become part of the thought. Oregon. Ping. Land. Ping. Cabin. Ping. Debt paid. Ping. Children grown. Ping. A roof that does not sing in leaks. Ping. You want to believe every miserable hour is purchasing something better. That is how endurance often explains itself. If suffering has a destination, perhaps it becomes noble. If cold feet lead to a warm hearth, perhaps they can be forgiven. If mud leads to a farm, perhaps mud is only a temporary teacher. But doubt slips in easily at night, especially through wet seams. What if the land is not as promised? What if sickness takes someone before the mountains? What if supplies fail? What if the future is just another hard place with a prettier name? A person nearby murmurs in sleep, a word you cannot catch. Maybe a name, maybe a prayer, Maybe a complaint addressed to the entire weather system. The sound is soft and human, and it anchors you. The future may be uncertain, but the present is crowded with breathing. For now, survival is local. Keep the blanket tucked. Keep the child warm. Keep the flour dry. Keep the animals alive. Keep going. You remember stories told at the start of the journey. Confident voices speaking of fertile valleys and generous seasons. Some were from people who had been there. Some were from people repeating other people who had allegedly been there, which is the old frontier version of a comment section, only with more pipe smoke. The farther a promise travels, the smoother it can become. Sharp edges wear down, hard winters become bracing, loneliness becomes space, labour becomes opportunity, mud becomes rich soil, which is technically true and emotionally unhelpful when it's inside your boot. Still, you let yourself dream, because dreams are also provisions. They weigh nothing and take no wagon space. They do not mould in damp weather. They can be shared without reducing the supply. A dream of Oregon can warm a mind even when it fails to warm the toes. You imagine morning after arrival, not tomorrow morning, but the far morning. You step out of a cabin. The air smells of cedar, earth, and wood smoke. Rain, if it falls on shingles. Your bedding is dry. Your hands hold a cup of coffee that has not been brewed beside a mud hole under emotional duress. The picture is so gentle that it almost carries you into sleep. Then cold returns at your ankle. Where the blanket has loosened, you reach down, tug it tight, and the whole wagon shifts in response to that one small act. A child sighs. Someone's elbow touches your ribs. The cooled stone rolls slightly and stops. The future recedes. But not entirely. It hovers beyond the canvas, beyond the rain, beyond the animals and the road. You lie between promise and doubt, between Oregon and this freezing night, between the life imagined and the life endured, and slowly, as the darkness thins by some invisible measure, the dream begins to loosen its hold, because before any green valley can be reached, morning must come grey and heavy, and your body must wake inside this damp wagon to discover what the night has done. Morning does not arrive like rescue. It seeps in, grey and reluctant, through the wet canvas, through the gaps at the rear flap, through the ache in your back and the stiffness in your hands. You wake before you are ready, which is to say, you wake correctly for the Oregon Trail. The first thing you notice is not light, it is weight. The blanket feels heavier than it did in the night. Your clothes feel heavier. Even your face feels as if the weather has been pressing a cold palm against it. For a moment, you do not know where you are. There is only dim cloth above you, a wooden sideboard at your shoulder, a sack near your knees, and the soft sound of someone breathing near your ear. Then the wagon creaks. The tin cup gives one last sleepy ping, and memory returns. Freezing rain, mud camp, wet socks, supper smoke, leaks in the canvas, Oregon hovering somewhere impossibly far away while you tried to sleep beside flour and disappointment. You move one foot. It is not as cold as it was at midnight, but it is not happy. The stone near your toes has gone fully cold. No longer a tiny sun, just a rock with a heroic past. You nudge it away carefully. A child beside you has migrated during the night and now occupies a position that seems to defy both anatomy and property law. One arm over a bundle, one knee against your shin, face hidden in quilts. Children can sleep anywhere. People say, this is only partly true. They can sleep anywhere by making adults sleep nowhere. The camp outside begins to stir in layers. First, a cough, then a low voice, then the wet thud of boots in mud. A kettle clanks, an ox snorts, long and foggy, somewhere farther off. Someone laughs in a hoarse, disbelieving way, the laugh of a person who has just stepped into water deeper than expected. Morning humour on the trail is often built from small defeats, if no one is dead. The mud is apparently allowed to be funny. You push yourself up on one elbow, your shoulder protests, your hip protests more formally, your neck feels as if it has spent the night negotiating with a wooden box and lost. When you sit, cold air slips under the blanket and runs down your back. You pause, eyes half closed, letting the misery introduce itself properly. There is no point rushing discomfort. It will still be there when you arrive. Trail mornings usually began early, often before sunrise or soon after first light, because animals needed tending. Breakfast had to be cooked, wagons loaded, and miles made while weather and road allowed. The daily routine could be relentless rise, cook, pack, yoke, roll, walk, halt, cook, mend, sleep, repeat. On a bright morning, that rhythm might feel purposeful, under a sodden sky. It feels more like being wound up like a clock nobody owns. You look around the wagon. The damage is small but everywhere. One blanket edge is damp. A corner of a clothing bundle has taken water. The coat wedged by the opening is soaked along one side, having served nobly as a draft stopper and sacrificial sponge. The tin cup beneath the leak holds a shallow measure of cold water, clear enough to mock you. A wooden box near the rear is darkened where drops struck through the night. Someone will need to dry it, check what is inside, and speak sternly to the sky. A curious thing about emigrant accounts is how often a morning after misery is recorded in almost comically plain language. Rained last night. Someone writes, roads bad, started late. A whole theatre of damp blankets, shivering children, coughing neighbours, stubborn ropes, and aching bones may collapse into 3 tidy words. Perhaps the writers were too tired for poetry. Perhaps understatement was a survival habit. Perhaps if they described the night honestly, they might have thrown the diary into the mud and walked back east. Outside, the ground has changed. Yesterday's mud has deepened, shined, and in some places begun to crust where the freezing rain hardened along puddle edges. Hoofprints are filled with cloudy water. Wheel ruts gleam darkly. Grass lies flattened and glazed. The world looks as if it has been varnished by a depressed cabinet maker. Every step must be chosen. Every object dropped will be harder to retrieve and less pleasant to touch. You climb down slowly, gripping the wagon side. The air smells of wet ashes, cold animals, mud, and smoke trapped low under the grey sky. Your first boot lands with the squelch that travels up your leg. Your second boot finds a firmer patch, briefly raising your hopes before sliding sideways. You catch yourself on the wheel. A graceful start. Very inspiring. Somewhere. Oregon waits, no doubt applauding politely. The oxen are being brought in. Or perhaps they never strayed far because the night was too miserable for ambition. Their backs are wet, their breath steaming, their eyes calm in the infuriating way oxen have. Men move around them with yokes and straps, fingers clumsy from cold. A strap has stiffened, a knot is stubborn, someone bends close, working it loose with patience that appears to be held together by coffee fumes. Food must happen again. Breakfast may be cornmeal mush, leftover beans, hard bread, coffee, or whatever can be prepared quickly with reluctant fire. Damp fuel makes smoke before heat. The fire coughs and smoulders. A woman kneels beside it, shielding the little flame from drizzle with her body and a pan lid. Her skirt hem is dark with mud. Her face is tired, but her hands keep working. This is how morning begins, not with cheer, but with competence. There remains a real question among historians about whether overland emigrants adapted quickly to the trail's daily routine, or merely became too exhausted to resist it. Some diary entries show growing skill and confidence. Others reveal continuing frustration, homesickness, illness, and strain. Likely both are true, depending on the person, the weather, the company, and the day. You can learn to yoke oxen in mud and still hate every second. Adaptation is not the same as enjoyment, despite what inspirational posters may suggest. You help pull bedding from the wagon, but only what can safely be exposed. There is no bright sun to dry it, only a cold grey air that seems uninterested in helping. Still, blankets are shaken, turned, folded differently, judged by touch. The driest pieces must be protected for the next night. Damp ones may ride where air can reach them if rain pauses. Nothing is simple. Even folding a quilt becomes a weather strategy. A child complains of cold hands. Someone gives them a cup to hold near the fire. Another child asks whether today will be better. No one answers immediately, which is honest but poor for morale. Finally, someone says the road may improve once the ground rises. May. The little word does a lot of work. It is almost a prayer in a shorter coat. You look back at the wagon. Its canvas sags less now that some water has run off, but it still looks tired, streaked, and stained. The wheels are sunk deep. Mud grips the tyres almost possessively. Before rolling, the team may have to pull hard and people may need to push, pry, or lighten the load. Morning has not erased the night, it has simply revealed the bill. Yet there is motion everywhere. Bowls are filled, ropes untied, animals positioned, children bundled, blankets shifted, cups wiped, axes lifted, wheels inspected. The camp becomes a living thing again, stiff but determined. Last night's fears fade into tasks. That is one mercy of labour. It leaves less room for imagination. You sip coffee if you're given some. It is bitter, smoky, and thin, but hot enough to matter. Steam touches your face for a few seconds. The world narrows to the cup between your hands. Then someone calls for help near the wagon tongue, and the day claims you. The sky remains low. The rain has not fully stopped. The road ahead is a long, grey ribbon of mud, water, and slow obligation. Your body wants rest, but the trail offers movement instead. You take one last look at the place where the wagon stood through the night. The churned ground, the cold ashes, the puddles, the marks of hooves and boots, and then you turn toward the work of rolling on. The wagon does not want to move. That is your first clear understanding as the oxen lean into the yoke and the wheels hold fast in the mud. The animals lower their heads, shoulders bunching beneath wet hides, breath rolling from their nostrils. Chains tighten, wood groans. The wagon shudders once, twice, then settles back as if the earth has decided it owns this particular vehicle now. Very bold of the earth, extremely inconvenient. You stand near the rear wheel with cold hands tucked briefly under your arms, waiting for the next command. The rain has faded into a fine mist, but the world remains soaked through. The canvas cover is dark and heavy. The bedding inside is folded, though not truly dry. The clothing bundles have been rearranged. The tin cup from last night's leak has been emptied, wiped, and restored to ordinary dignity. The warm stone, no longer warm, lies near the fire ring like a retired hero. Someone calls for everyone to push. You place your shoulder against the wagon's rear corner, careful of the slick wood. Others gather along the side. Boots sink, slide, and search for grip. The oxen lean again. The driver murmurs to them, then lifts his voice. The chain draws tight with a hard metallic note. The wheel turns a fraction, stops, then turns again. Mud sucks at the tire with a wet, stubborn pull. You push until your breath catches. Then, with a sound halfway between a sigh and a complaint, the wagon breaks free. It lurches forward. Only a few feet. but the whole camp seems to exhale. The oxen keep moving. The wheels roll into the rut ahead. Mud clings to the spokes and drops in heavy clods. You step after it, nearly losing a boot, because the trail likes a joke before breakfast. By 1849, the overland road west had become heavily travelled in places, with deep wagon ruts, crowded camps near water, and stretches marked by discarded goods, graves, and the traces of earlier companies. You're not moving through untouched emptiness, even if the prairie sometimes looks endless. Others have passed before you, dragging wheels through the same mud, cursing similar ropes, nursing similar hopes. The road is a memory pressed into earth. The wagon train begins to lengthen into motion, one wagon, then another, then another. Drivers called to oxen. Children are gathered and counted. Dogs weave along the edges, busy with mysteries. A woman lifts her skirt hem above the worst mud and steps with careful patience. A man walks beside a wheel, watching it for wobble. Someone coughs into a cloth. Someone else laughs when a mule refuses a puddle with the moral conviction of a judge. You walk because riding would burden the animals, and because the wagon is packed with supplies that matter more than your comfort, which is very flattering to the flower. Your legs are stiff from the night, but they loosen by degrees. The cold air wakes your face. Damp wool rubs at your shoulders. Your boots make that steady wet pull and release. Pull and release, as if the mud is trying to keep a conversation going. Inside the wagon, the bedding rides in a careful arrangement. Damp pieces are placed where air might reach them if the mist lifts. Drier pieces are guarded deeper within. Last night has not ended. It has become cargo. The cold in your feet, the ache in your back, the smell of smoke in your hair, the memory of the cup pinging in darkness. All of it travels with you. There is a peculiar note in many Western stories. People often described hardship and monotony side by side. One day could contain fear, beauty, boredom, hunger, and absurdity without any clear boundary between them. A freezing night did not stop the next morning from requiring breakfast. A grand national migration still depended on finding a dry place for socks. History is always doing this, putting enormous themes in the same wagon with damp underclothes. The road ahead shines grey, water gathers in the ruts, and the wheels choose the same grooves because there is nowhere else to go. Grass bends under the mist. The sky hangs low, layered and dull, but to the west there is a faint thinning, not sunlight yet. Only the idea that the clouds may eventually grow tired of themselves. You accept this as encouragement on the trail. Optimism can be very small and still count. A debate remains among historians about how emigrants understood endurance in the moment, whether they framed it as religious testing, practical necessity, family duty, economic ambition, or simply the next thing to be done. Diaries show all of these. Sometimes within the same life, you feel no need to choose as you walk behind the wagon. Endurance is not a slogan. It is the act of lifting one muddy boot, then the other. It is pushing when called. It is saving the dry blanket. It is letting the child take the warmer place. It is not turning every complaint into speech. The oxen settle into their rhythm, slow, steady, patient. Their hooves press dark half-moons into the road. Their sides move with breath. The wagon follows, creaking, rocking, carrying everything your family has not abandoned. Flour, blankets, tools, tinware, clothing, keepsakes, repairs, plans, and the invisible weight of last night. You glance at the canvas cover, stained and sagging, and feel a strange tenderness for it. It leaked, it smelled, it trapped cold air and crowded bodies. But it also held imperfect shelter is still shelter. You remember the little social weather inside the wagon, the whispered prayers, the child's foot against your shin, The woman sewing in the dark, the shared blanket, the cooling stone. You remember the oxen breathing outside like patient engines made of hide and hay. You remember Oregon shining in imagination while the tin cup measured the leak. None of those memories is heroic in the polished sense. They're better than that. They are ordinary and stubborn. The wagon jolts over a rut. A pot clinks inside. Someone tells a child to mind the puddle. Someone else says the road may improve after the rise. May again, that tiny faithful word. You let it walk beside you. Behind the train. The night camp disappears slowly. The fire rings turn to black smears. The churned mud keeps the shape of wheels and hooves. The place where you try to sleep becomes just another wet patch along the trail. One among hundreds. Then thousands. No marker will say you shivered there. No sign will mention the leak above your shoulder. The prairie keeps few personal records. But your body remembers. Your hands remember the rope. Your feet remember the stone. Your nose remembers smoke and wet canvas. Your ears remember rain, ox breath, and that ridiculous little ping. You carry the night forward, not because you want to, but because that is how the trail works. It turns weather into memory, memory into patience, and patience into another mile. The train rolls on through the grey morning. You walk beside the wagon, damp, aching, underfed, and still moving. Oregon remains far away, but not farther than it was yesterday. The road takes its payment slowly. You pay in sleep, in warmth, in comfort, in things left behind. Yet each turning wheel writes one more line in the long, muddy sentence of going on. Now the wheels soften in your hearing. They turn more slowly in the mind than they did on the road, rounding over mud, over grass, over the quiet places where rain once gathered and then sank away. The cold begins to loosen its fingers. The canvas no longer presses so close. The wagon grows dimmer, gentler, less crowded, as if memory has lifted the hard corners and left only the hush of breathing beneath cloth. You do not need to push now. You do not need to guard the flour, tighten the rope, warm the stone, or listen for the next drip. The oxen know the road. The family sleeps without worry. The rain becomes softer than rain, more like a distant hand brushing leaves. Even the mud rests, no longer gripping boots, no longer holding wheels, only cooling under a pale and patient sky. Somewhere far ahead, Oregon is still green in the imagination, but there is no need to hurry toward it. Let it wait. Let the valley, the cabin, the orchard, and the dry bed remain beyond the next rise, glowing gently without asking anything of you tonight. You have walked enough. You have shivered enough. You have learned how much comfort can live inside a small kindness, a shared blanket, a quiet hand, a cup moved beneath a leak. So now the wagon rolls away from the storm, and the storm rolls away from you. The tapping fades, the creaking fades, the oxen's breath becomes a low, warm rhythm, slow as sleep itself. The dark canvas above you turns into a soft night sky, and the trail beneath you smooths into silence. Rest there, safe outside the old cold. Let the last little drop fall, far away, into a tin cup you no longer have to empty. Let the road continue without you for a while. Let your eyes grow heavy, and let history become only a whisper. Sweet dreams.